to be Derek Carter, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, but unfortunately now you've got a second lawyer presenting to you. So today is rather fascinating with two lawyers presenting about two mining companies. For today's speech, I was asked to be a little bit insightful as opposed to just promotional. So what I thought I would do is to take the definition of insightful to be provocative. Rather than present about necessarily Highfield's fantastic projects, and I'm going to assure you I'll get to that, I also want to focus on really what potash is. And I think that one of the challenges that we have as an organisation, as a small cap resources company with potash projects, is that potash is one of those commodities that really doesn't have the same level of depth of understanding that alternate types of commodities have. And it's really a function of the fact that there's not a lot of potash produced in Australia. In fact, there's no potash produced in Australia. And there's very limited production of potash globally that's visible. So the main production of potash globally that's visible is the Canadian production. But there's a hell of a lot of potash that gets produced outside of Canada, where the reporting requirements aren't necessarily as stringent. Let's see whether this works. It's a safe harbour statement that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Potash is not iron ore. And we have had some analysts of late that have confused potash with iron ore, so what I thought I would do is actually make sure it's very clear that we understand that potash is not iron ore. The first thing in potash is you can raise money if you're a potash producer. Potash Corp this week announced a $500 million bond issue at 3%. Now, Potash Corp are an enormous organisation, and I understand that, but K plus S out of Germany, just after the breakup of the Belarusian and Russian potash cartel, went to market for $1 billion euro bond issue. They raised $1 billion at 3.6%. That 3.6%, those corporate bonds are currently trading at a yield to maturity of less than 1.5%. Intrepid, who's the smallest potash producer globally, in 2012 raised $150 million in the US at 3.9%. The next thing you've got with potash is you've actually got more than one market. So potash is generally the production is fairly in geographically remote regions, but there's a reasonable spread of consumption globally. So in fact, China is the third largest export market for potash. The largest export market is Brazil. The second largest export market is the US. And China is the third largest, and it's about a similar size market as the EU. The next thing is the way that potash companies trade. Potash companies listed in New York trade as industrial companies. They do not trade as mining companies. So you've currently got investors in North America buying potash companies on the premise of dividend yield as industrial companies as opposed to mining companies. The fourth thing you've got is the valuation metrics for potash companies. Given the low cost of capital, and in addition to that, given the relatively smooth profile and concentration of the market and the longevity of the assets, you've got potash companies historically for the last 10 years trading at forward EBITDA multiples of 9.5 times on North American stock exchanges. And look, what I thought I'd do for good measure is show you what a standard muriate of potash looks like, but also I love the potatoes. For us, potash is all about capex and margin. One of the things that people misunderstand with respect to capex is capex is not a first order issue, it's a second order issue. Capex is a response to mineralisation and location. The easier it is to get the mineralisation out of the ground And the easier it is to process that mineralisation, the lower the capex. And where you are located drives your ability to need to spend money on things like ports, on things like energy storage, on things like labour. The other thing that location drives is your ability to raise money. So you look at a project in Africa and you've got African development banks. You look at a project in Europe and you've got European commercial banks. You've got a 6-month project financing process versus a 2-year project financing process. Potash is also about margin. And one of the things that people confuse with margin is a concept called cost curve. The cost curve is a part of the margin analysis. Margin essentially says, what does my customer pay me and how much does it cost for me to get that to my customer? So part of your OPEX is a cost to gate. But when you get to gate, you've then got a royalty. When you pay a royalty, you've then got to determine whether you've got a high G&A bill because you're running remote communities. You've then got to determine how far it takes me to get to a port where I can actually distribute it from. And then you've got to determine how far it takes me from that port to get to my customer, or whether my customer is that port. So in potash, you've got a lot of potash hitting the Port of Vancouver, and the Port of Vancouver is ultimately the reference price. All potash from there gets built up, so the potash price they pay in Brazil is $50 a tonne more than the price that they pay at the Port of Vancouver. This is a great slide, this picture, and I apologise for the minutiae of it. What this talks to is one of the issues that you have with mineralisation and potash. So this is the mineralisation profile of the major Russian sedimentary basin, where they currently produce about 12 million tonnes of potash a year. What you've got is you've got a saltwater aquifer and a clean water aquifer between the mineralisation and the surface. So to get to that mineralisation, you have to freeze a column of water in an aquifer times 2 before you actually have your shaft down into the mineralisation. So what you're looking at there is not a product of high capex, you're looking at a response to difficult mineralisation. Okay? So what we're talking to ultimately is capex and margin, mineralisation and location, customer price and cost to customer. The next slide. What this slide is in essence doing is it's challenging the iron ore theme that says iron ore is about grade and scale. Ultimately, this is a classic example of 2 producing potash companies. Intrepid Potash producing in the middle of the US and Potash Corp producing in the middle of Canada. Potash Corp produced from 5 mines, and they have an average last year of about 9 million tonnes. From a scale perspective, it's roughly 1.8 million tonnes a mine at 33% recovered product. Intrepid Potash, on the other hand, have 5 mines producing about 900,000 tonnes of product. The 900,000 tonnes is about 180,000 tonnes a mine at 14% recovered product. So what that's saying is that Intrepid are pulling out 2.5 times the mineralisation out of the ground to get 1 tonne of potash, and it's saying that Intrepid's scale per mine is 1/10 the size of Potash Corp's. Who makes more money per tonne? The slides on the right, which I wanted to put the detail in because we can see it later if necessary. Intrepid last year received a $93 a tonne more than what Potash Corp receives for their potash. So over the last 3 years, Intrepid Potash has received a higher margin than the 3 major Canadian producers. So now, here's the thing. On the cost curve, Intrepid's cost of production is greater than FOB Vancouver. Who stops producing first? The person that sits on the cost curve or the person that makes the lower margin? The next slide talks to the margin builder. It effectively talks to the difference between the Canadian solution mine and the German difficult underground conventional mines. The German solution mine in Canada, they've currently released to the market really exciting information about the fact that they're going to have $80 a tonne mining and processing costs. In Germany, the processing costs are over $150 a tonne, the mining and processing costs. But what you've got with the solution mine is you've got a difficult location, which means that you've effectively got 1,800 kilometres of rail to port. You've got extensive sustaining capex because of the continuation on a yearly basis of actually building caverns. And then what you've got is you've got the Port of Vancouver as a customer, as opposed to domestic Northwest Europe as a customer. So, but the Canadian solution mine is at 18% K2O. The German underground mine is at 12% K2O. But the German underground mine makes a significantly higher margin than the Canadian solution mine. And then what you've got with the Canadian solution mine is a capex profile that effectively deals with the difficulty of mineralisation and deals with the difficulty of location. So the Canadian solution mine is a $4 billion mine for 2 million tonnes a year with all of the money spent up front. Now for the market. Highfield has 4 100% owned projects in the northwest of Spain. The important thing for Highfield is that we have control of an entire producing basin or a former producing basin. The Sierra del Perdón mine produced potash for 34 years between 1962 and 1996. It produced potash via 3 declines. The first mine was a longwall mine and the second mine was a room and pillar mine. What you've got though is you've got a very unique proposition in the potash space, which is you do not have aquifers over the top of the mineralisation because you're able to access it via a decline. It's not deep. Silvanite seams are not thin. There is no difficult potassium salts underlying the main potassium salts level that we're looking for. There is great competency in the sedimentary basin from a hanging wall perspective and a footwall perspective, which means that mining is relatively straightforward. And in addition to that, you've got a rail terminal within 4 kilometres. You've then got a port that they used to use within 75 kilometres, which is an Atlantic port that gets you easy access into Brazil. There are 3 other projects, and we released the definitive feasibility study results on our flagship project this week. More to this point, we sit in the Ebro Basin. The Ebro Basin has been home to 4 potash mines. 2 mines are still producing, and the Ebro potash operations that are currently owned by Israeli Chemicals have been producing potash for over 90 years. What we've got is no technology proposition. This is a proven basin. This is proven mining. This is proven processing. We have to do exactly the same thing that they did 40 kilometres away from our flagship project for 34 years. We've got to do exactly the same thing that they're currently doing across 76% of global production, which is underground conventional mining of potash with flotation circuit processing, producing a muriate of potash, or a KCl, or a K60 product, which is 60 million tonnes of the 67 to 68 million tonne a year potassium salt market. And in addition to that, we've got a friend in the CEO of ICL who came out last August and talked about how shockingly attractive their projects are in the Ebro Basin and how they are planning on fast-tracking expansion opportunities in the Ebro Basin because of how shockingly attractive they are. So for us, this is beautiful. Don't believe a Sydney lawyer. Believe the ICL of a potash company producing over 5.5 million tonnes of potash a year with a market capitalisation of close to $10 billion. This ultimately manifests itself in low capex and high margin mining. Capex being driven by mineralisation and the ability to access the mineralisation via a decline, effectively the lack of aquifers. The capex being driven by location, no need to build energy storage, no need to build ports, no need to build roads, no need to build labour camps. And the margin being driven by cash cost to customer against what the customer is going to pay you in Northwest Europe and Brazil versus what the customer is going to pay you at FOB Vancouver. So we do have higher mining and processing costs than the high-grade producers in Canada, but we don't pay royalties. But we've got 150 kilometres by truck to port. But our sustaining capex profile is relatively low because of the upfront capex. And we get an extra $50 a tonne for our potash. Remember, potash is a relatively homogeneous product. And most of the global purchasing of potash is a K60 granular or standard product. So in summary, project is king. What that effectively talks to is the mineralisation, the location, what the customer pays, and how much it costs you to get to your customer, and ultimately what the economics look like, factoring in the ability to raise money and the technical risk of the project. For us, we released our definitive feasibility study this week, which effectively talks to the reason why we think the projects are so compelling. Highfield is in a wonderful position with 4 100% owned projects that, in our opinion, tick all of the boxes that you're looking to tick to take a potash project into production.